longer, and you said it can all be done in 15 minutes. So we were going to start a half an hour earlier, and you said it was necessary. So do I have a seconder for his motion?
5 minutes.
All those in favor?
He wants an extra 5, he wants. He wants, 20 minutes to make his presentation.
Opposed?
2 opposed.
2
Three
opposed. Okay, the minutes carried. So it'll be 20 minutes then.
But you're getting 20 minutes now. That's all.
You may proceed.
Good morning, Chair.
Sorry, maybe your legal counsel, maybe, is Mr. Hansen?
Hassan.
Hassan? Welcome.
Thank you.
Good morning, Chair Kolb, honorable members of council, and city staff. My name is Liesa Cianchino, and I'm the chair of the Concerned Residents' Appeal to End Fluoridation. Since April 28, 2011, the Concerned Residents' Appeal have made delegations to regional council and have articulated to you the urgent concerns related to the safety and lawfulness of the chemical additives used in our drinking water. For decades now, all levels of government, public health officials, dental associations, and many other organizations have unconditionally reassured regional council members, residents, that the community water fluoridation is both safe and effective. Over the past few years, we have continued to highlight the serious concerns related to the artificial fluoridation, water fluoridation, pardon me, with respect to the many adverse health effects and risks, the mass medication of the entire region, the lack of informed consent, and the potential illegality of the region's fluoridation program, including the Clean Water Act 2006, which empowers communities to take action to prevent threats from becoming significant. During these past few years, a growing body of new scientific research has been published in leading peer-reviewed scientific and medical journals, which corroborate our position on these issues. We want to draw your attention to some major legal challenges that need to be addressed before the council can legally continue the current fluoridation program. The public has the right to know and the right to get answers. Council has been alerted numerous times on the new legislation in the Ontario Safe Drinking Water Act 2002, Section 19, now includes a broader statutory standard of care for individuals who have oversight responsibilities for municipal drinking water systems that extend to our municipal councillors. We respectfully ask that you reopen the fluoridation issue and afford our lawyer your attention as he sets out for you some key legal arguments against fluoridation. Thank you.
Thank you for that introduction, Liesa. Regional Chair Kolb, regional councillors. I'm here as legal counsel to Ms. Cianchino and her group, Concerned Residents' Appeal to End Fluoridation. They've asked me to preview for this council some of the key legal arguments that we would bring were we to challenge the region's fluoridation program in court. The idea being that if we preview these legal arguments and show our hand, we could perhaps avoid a lengthy and costly legal fight in the courts. So today I want to address two main questions: what the potential legal arguments would be, and I also, in so doing, want to address the region's potential liability if we're successful on these legal arguments. And I do want to close as well with some suggestions or recommendations for the council. There are essentially three legal arguments, three main headings under which we would proceed. The first is that the Ontario fluoridation program and the region's fluoridation program violates Section 7 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms because its harms are grossly disproportionate to its benefits. The second argument is that it violates an Ontario statute, the Safe Drinking Water Act, and the third argument is that it violates the Federal Food and Drugs Act. Now, I won't have the time to go into all of the minutiae of these arguments today, but I understand that you've been distributed a legal memorandum that was authored by myself and my office, as well as a supporting affidavit from a leading scientist based in the United States who has worked for the National Research Council, the U.S. National Research Council, in a couple of in-depth comprehensive studies on fluoridation programs. Let me begin with the first argument and sketch it out for you in the time I have here today, which is in many ways the most important argument because it's the one that touches most squarely on the health and safety of Peel residents. Under Canadian constitutional law, the government can't put people's health and safety at risk, particularly where the benefits from a government program or law or action are grossly disproportionate in relation to the potential harms. That's the principle of gross disproportionality, which is a principle of fundamental justice under Section 7 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And that's exactly what we seem to have with artificial water fluoridation. On one hand, the benefit or purported benefits of water fluoridation are marginal at best, if it exists at all. And on the other hand, the adverse effects are significant, potentially extremely significant. And that's the essence of grossly disproportionate government action. Let me deal with the first side of the ledger, the marginal benefits. The purpose of fluoridation program, of water fluoridation, has always been to reduce dental decay. And since the 1950s, it has been virtually gospel within dental communities that community fluoridation of drinking water is responsible for reducing tooth decay. This belief was once thought to be unassailable, despite the absence of solid peer-reviewed scientific literature on the subject. But the evidence available today makes it far from clear that water fluoridation is responsible for reduced tooth decay across communities. As reflected in the Dr. Thyssen affidavit, which you have, modern studies show that there are numerous other factors, including modern dental care, including better diets, and socioeconomic and hygienic factors that are likely more responsible for falls in tooth decay than water fluoridation. And part of the proof for that lies in the fact that many jurisdictions, including virtually all of Western Europe, are unfluoridated. Yet in these regions, we see falling tooth decay rates at virtually the same rate as what we have in fluoridated regions in North America. So the inescapable inference from these factors is that the cause of the fall in tooth decay is not due to water fluoridation, but due to these other factors: improved dental care since the 1950s, improved diets, and the availability of fluoridated toothpaste. Now, even those who support water fluoridation, dentists among them, will concede that fluoride works primarily topically, that is, by direct exposure to the tooth, and not by ingestion. In other words, to the extent that fluoride works, it does so via direct exposure to the tooth and not through exposure to the internal organs. The U.S. Centre for Disease Control and Prevention, an authority that the Ontario government and Health Canada rely on, they concede this point. So if the primary benefit of fluoride is through topical treatment on the teeth, that supports an argument that we should have fluoridated toothpaste. But it doesn't support the argument that we should ingest fluoride in our drinking water. So in other words, there may be a good argument for having fluoridated toothpaste, but if that's so, it doesn't explain why we need to ingest it. So that's one side of the ledger, the marginal benefit from fluoridating drinking water. And on the other side of the ledger, you have significant adverse health concerns. The most authoritative study done to date on this subject, on the toxicological effects of fluoride, was a comprehensive study done in 2006 by the U.S. National Research Council. That's a nonpartisan group of eminent scientists, which is funded largely by the U.S. government and Congress. Dr. Thiessen, whose affidavit you have, was a part of that study. And in her affidavit, she outlines a number of the findings of the NRC. Among the findings of adverse health effects was that fluoridated drinking water causes dental fluorosis. Generally, that's a cosmetic staining of the teeth, but when it's serious, it can cause structural damage to the teeth. Perhaps more alarming than that, fluoride in drinking water has the potential to cause musculoskeletal damage, including increased risk of bone fracture and arthritis. And this is very serious. And the NRC report said that even exposure at a fluoride rate of 0.08 milligrams per liter, which is within the allowable rate within Ontario, could lead to increased bone fractures. Thank you very much, Regional Chair.
Runs 10 minutes at a time.
Thank you very much, Regional Counsel. And I think I'm on track to finish. And again, I don't have time to go through these findings in detail, but they are in the materials before you. There has also been a number of studies that have suggested a correlation between fluoride exposure of children and lower IQ rates. Many of those studies come from outside of North America, but a recent Harvard study, which is cited in the memo, identified this area as an area of significant concern. And perhaps most alarmingly of all, the NRC committee unanimously concluded that fluoride appears to have the potential to initiate or promote cancers. And that finding was corroborated by another 2006 study from the Harvard Dental School, which found an association between bone cancer in young boys and childhood exposure to fluoridated drinking water. So, this information wasn't around in the 1950s and 60s when most fluoridation programs were adopted across North America. But this information is available now. You can't justify, under our laws, putting people's health at risk by relying on dogma from the 1950s, particularly when that dogma has been supplanted by scientific evidence and medical evidence available today. If we can prove in court, and I think the existing scientific and medical literature suggests we can, that fluoride and fluoridated drinking water causes these harms, then a court would be obliged to conclude that Peel's fluoridation program violates Section 7 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and that in turn could make the region liable to Peel residents in tort for exposure to the risk of harm caused by water fluoridation. Now, let me move very briefly on to some of the other arguments that don't rely on a constitutional argument but are based in statute. Water fluoridation arguably also violates the Ontario Safe Drinking Water Act and the Federal Food and Drugs Act. My understanding is that the method that Peel uses to fluoridate its water is with a compound known as hexafluorosilicic acid. Now that is a product which is generated as a byproduct, which is a euphemism for waste product, in the fertilizer manufacturing process. And this is troubling because there are no known toxicological studies on the safety of using hexafluorosilicic acid to fluoridate drinking water. And this compound contains a number of other chemicals and contaminants, including lead and chromium and even arsenic. Now, defenders of using this compound to fluoridate drinking water say, hey, by the time it's put into the drinking water, it's diluted so much that it's not going to be a huge health risk. That's small comfort for people. I think most Peel residents would be shocked to hear that the region was knowingly adding a compound that contained arsenic to the drinking water. Arsenic, of course, is a known carcinogen. the United States EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, sets the ideal goal for arsenic in drinking water at 0 because it is a known carcinogen. And in my respectful submission, it's not just bad policy to use a compound with contaminants like arsenic in the drinking water, it's also arguably illegal. Section 20 of the Safe Drinking Water Act provides that no person shall cause or permit anything to enter a drinking water system if it could result in a drinking water health hazard. Similarly, under the Food and Drugs Act, the federal legislation, no person shall sell an article or food, and that food is defined to include drink that has in it any poisonous or harmful substance. Now, the common refrain that I have heard is that the Fluoridation Act of Ontario permits municipalities to fluoridate the city water supply. Well, in response to that, number one, that doesn't get you around the constitutional argument that I've laid out earlier today, because the Constitution is supreme law in Canada and trumps any statutory law. Secondly, although the Fluoridation Act permits provinces, the province of Ontario, it permits regions and municipalities to fluoridate, it doesn't say you can fluoridate by any means necessary. And it doesn't say expressly that you can use hexafluoroacetic acid. The city still has an obligation to ensure that its methods of fluoridating are safe and effective. And that brings me very briefly, Regional Chair Kolb, if you'll permit me 2 more minutes, to deal with the question of liability. If we are right in our legal arguments, then the city is liable to the residents of Peel, both under the Municipal Act of Ontario, which you're all familiar with, and the Safe Drinking Water Act of Ontario, which was amended to strengthen it in the face of the Walkerton scandal. The Safe Drinking Water Act puts responsibility for ensuring safe drinking water squarely on the municipalities, which means you can't pass the buck. It also makes those who make decisions about drinking water, including councillors, personally liable for the drinking water systems in their municipalities. So not only is the region responsible and liable to the residents of Peel, councillors individually are potentially liable under this statute. So in closing, Regional Chair, you don't have to take what I say at face value. There's a lot of science, there's a lot of medicine, but you ought to at least examine it. And you ought to hear experts, not just from the field of dentistry, but from the fields of toxicology, from the fields of epidemiology, from the fields of medicine. And you ought to hear from experts on both sides. And when experts do come before you to talk about this, you should insist on seeing the underlying science and the underlying evidence. Because what we've found is that the statements from authorities who are defending fluoridation programs, they seem to proceed along the following lines. Trust us, we know better than you. But they don't seem to be backing up their positions with hard science, with hard medicine, with peer-reviewed studies and reports. And if fluoridation were challenged in a court of law, the court would insist on hard evidence, hard studies, hard facts. That's what a court would require, and respectfully, councillors, you should demand no less. If you're going to continue on this path of fluoridating, you should at least know the science that you're relying on, because ultimately it will be you who will be held accountable to the residents of this region. Those are my submissions, and I'm happy to answer any questions if any have arisen.
Okay, under our procedural bylaw, the delegations have completed their presentation. Council may have one opportunity to ask a question of delegation for clarification purpose only and not without debate. Mayor Morrison.
Thank you, Chair Kolb. I actually just wanted to point out that I have a motion and that I would like it put forward, please. Thank you.
I do have a motion from Councillor Morrison and Whitehead that the delegation listed on item 5.1 on June the 26th, 2014 Regional Council agenda be received, and further that the regional solicitor report back on the future meeting of a regional council with the legal advice relating to the issue of the raised by the delegation. You want that voted on now? I have another speaker.
No, I would, there's other speakers to
Okay.
ask questions
Well,
of
hold on.
clarification. I just wanted council to know that there is a motion
Okay.
to try and get,
Well, just for information purposes, I do have and I'll take them as they were presented. I have the motion that you've seen from Sproviary last, and I won't read all the whereases. Therefore, be it resolved that Regional Council reopen the issue of artificial water fluoridation for the sole purpose of establishing a working group, a council member staff, which will invite both pro and anti-fluoridation experts and provide information to the committee and report back to council with its finding. And I have a further motion by Peleschi and Thompson that the motions listed on items 13.1 on July the 26th, 2014 Regional Council agenda be deferred to a further Regional Council meeting in which the Regional Solicitor will provide his relative legal advice. Councillor Sproviary.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have just a question of clarification. Mr. Sain, you indicated that, excuse me, that in your research, you were not able, there's a number of organizations and that are in support of fluoridation. And, but you've indicated that these organizational groups have not been able, or at least they have not provided any evidence of that there is actual the hard studies that backs up their claim of that fluoridation is safe and effective. Now you do have, in your opinion, an affidavit from an expert in the field that actually says that it's not that good for us. Were you able to find in your research any such similar expert in the field that maintains that water fluoridation is safe and effective?
I have not been able to find peer-reviewed scientific studies. Sure, there are health authorities that assert that fluoridation is safe, but I haven't found peer-reviewed studies, particularly modern ones, and particularly not those that go into the level of detail that the NRC study went into.
So you did look for that then?
Of course, yes.
You did look for that. You didn't look for the anti ones, the ones that are against. You looked for the ones who were actually supportive to see if there was any.
That's right, Councillor Sprovier.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Chairman, I'd like to pull my motion on 13.1 to be considered after the delegation's finished.
Okay.
And I also have I believe I have the right to give a few minutes my reasons why I'd like to have this reopened. I believe I have that opportunity.
Well, I'll get to that when I deal with the delegation.
Thank you.
Councillor Toby?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. It's just actually a question of clarification for our legal department. At the last meeting, when you people came and presented, I requested that our legal department be given a copy of your legal arguments in enough advance time that they could actually look at them before the meeting. So I was wondering to our legal department whether or not that occurred.
I received Mr. Hassan's opinion document on Tuesday afternoon.
Well, it's 3 days ago.
Yes.
2 days ago. Yeah. So in your opinion, would that give you time enough to actually do a fulsome review of this?
It certainly doesn't give me enough time to do a fulsome review for today's purposes.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you.
Councillor Starr?
Just as a point of clarification on the fluoride itself, is this an element that, and I'm sure it's in here someplace, but for clarification, is this an element that's retained in the body, or is it something that's passed through?
You're probably going to want to hear from a scientist on that question.
Okay.
I can answer questions about the law, but you're probably going to want to hear from a scientist on that. My understanding is that it can be retained in the body, which is part of why it can lead to skeletal fluorosis and bone fractures. If it passed through, then you probably wouldn't have those issues, but you're going to want to hear from scientists and doctors and epidemiologists on this.
And further, with all the studies that are here, have there been long-term studies as to the, say, from the 50s to the 2000s, insofar as, I guess, autopsies and element retention? Is that something that's been done over the years or not?
Again, you're probably going to want to ask the scientists about this.
Okay. Great, thank you.
There's been no studies.
My list of delegation, I want to thank you very much for being here and for your presentation. And I have a motion by Morrison and Whitehead that the delegate listed on item 5 on June 26, 2014 Regional Council agenda be received, and further that the regional solicitor report back on a future meeting a regional council with legal advice relating to the issue raised by the delegation. All those in favor? Opposed, anyone? Motion's carried. Okay. So I read you, therefore be it resolved that the Regional Council reopen the issue of the artificial water fluoridation for the sole purpose of establishing a working group with council meeting and staff will invite both pro and anti-fluoridation experts and provide information to the committee and report to council with its finding. I have to rule, I believe, according to our procedure, because I do have a motion from Pelesci and Thompson that the motion listed on item 13.1 on June the 26th, 2014 Regional Council meeting be deferred to future Regional Council meeting, at which time the regional solicitor will provide his related legal advice. So a deferral motion takes precedent over the main motion, and so I'm going to ask for a vote on the motion I've just read. All those in favor? Just a minute.
Mr. Chairman, I can speak to the deferral motion.
No, you cannot. You can speak to a refer motion, but you can't speak to a deferral motion.
I could record a vote, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. I've been asked for a record vote on the motion. All those. Oh. Can I ask staff over there to put this on the screen, please? It's on the screen. And I'm going to ask for the record vote, and all those to stand, please. All those in favor.
Councillor Carlson, Councillor Crombie, Councillor Foley, Councillor Fonseca, Councillor Ianica, Councillor Mahoney, Councillor McFadden, Councillor Miles, Councillor Moore, Mayor Morrison, Councillor Mullen, Councillor Pelesci, Councillor Paderak, Councillor Sato, Councillor Starr, Councillor Thompson, Councillor Tovey, Councillor Whitehead,
Opposed?
Councillor Sanderson, and Councillor Spovieri.
What's the
Carries.
vote number?
18-2,
18-2. The rest are absent.
correct?
Okay. Councillor Spovieri.
I have a clarification, Mr. Chairman. It says a future council meeting. Does that mean in 2 years' time, a year's time, a month's time? What does that mean?
Well, I think that I have to refer to our solicitor for that.
That's very important to understand exactly where we're going with this, because we need to know. We don't want it to go to the next term of office, or we want it to be dealt with at this in this term. So I need to know. I believe it's important to know that what the intention is, or when this will come back to us.
Mr. O'Connor?
Clearly, a significant amount of preparation went into the memorandum that's been circulated to you and the preparation of the presentation you heard today. Given Council's schedule, Council won't be actually sitting over the summer months of July and August. I think I could bring a report back comfortably to the September, first meeting in September is, sorry, the date?
September 11th.
September 11th.
I don't know whether the members of council, but I understood this was delivered when?
2 days ago.
2 days ago? So it's in your black binder that you have. Okay, thank you very much again. Moving on then to the next item on our agenda, we have a presentation. 5.2 is from Brian Denny, the Chief Administrative Officer, Toronto Region Conservation Authority. I'd like to ask him to come forward, please.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of council. Thank you for the opportunity to be back. Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, that's better. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I'm sitting at the back if you need me.
Morning, Brian.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Would you like me to wait for a minute until it clears, or if you can hear me, I'll just proceed?
Yeah, why
then?
don't we continue?
Thank you. We were asked to give a quick overview of some of our highlights from 2013-14 and also some preliminary information about the budget target for 2015, which I am happy to do. Obviously, our priorities are continuing to focus on the areas we've identified jointly with the region about high risk, and most of those are around climate change. You've probably heard on the press this morning we had another fairly significant event last night in the City of Toronto with some fairly extensive flooding, close to 100 millimeters of rainfall in an event that was not forecast. So we're continuing to deal with these kinds of unexpected, major, intense rainfalls, and much of our work in Peel is focused on identifying where those risks exist and with the potential to cause major problems. Many of you know we have still about a dozen communities or so in the region of Peel, in our part of the region of Peel at least, that are susceptible to flooding events, and we're continuing to look at the details of how those risks can be dealt with. We've been successful working closely with the City of Brampton to deal with the SPA now, so we've established a very good risk-based system that will enable some very much desired redevelopment in downtown Brampton, and we're continuing to look at the larger picture of how that channel might be enhanced to improve its capacity and make it even more of a significant environmental feature in downtown Brampton. In other parts of the region, we've had to look at some new flood forecasting tools that will allow us to do two-dimensional modeling now in areas where we're subject to fairly broad, extensive flooding, and we're looking at the details of that in a number of different communities. We're doing some very significant research through our Ontario Climate Change Consortium that has about a dozen universities now focusing their particular areas of expertise in looking at aspects of the climate change challenge. Some of this is focused on natural heritage, and much of it in the region of Peel, we're looking at the implications on the agricultural sector. We're very excited about some large on-the-ground projects. About a year from now, we'll be in construction of the new Lakeview project. The environmental assessment review is going well, so we're looking forward to getting that construction going next year. We're continuing to do a lot of on-the-ground restoration, whether that's in the form of new forests, new wetlands, or riparian plantings along our various watercourses. With your support, since you've increased the funding support to conservation authorities considerably since 2007, we've been able to effectively double the amount of tree planting that we do annually. And again, in 2014, we'll do about 100,000 trees and shrubs in our part of the region. The Pearson Eco-Business Zone, Partners in Project Green, is continuing to develop rapidly. We've had some great progress on energy efficiency, water efficiency, and increasingly now in the areas of waste management with our waste exchange. These are just some of the companies that are involved in that, and there's been some very interesting projects developing there about waste materials from one industry becoming a raw material for another, and we're working very closely with Peel's waste management staff to seek as much synergy as we can between our various programs. We're very excited about what's happening with Bolton Camp. We had 2 design charrettes with 2 different high schools, over 140 students involved in identifying some exciting futures for that property. This summer we'll have over 60 students working on the property doing cleanup, restoration, and program development. We're very optimistic that we'll actually have some new business enterprise ideas come out of that effort. We're working closely with George Brown College and other partners at the school boards and others. Just looking quickly at the numbers, you can see the amount of funding you've provided to us in 2014, which we're very grateful for. Our original 2015 forecast had seen that grow potentially to about 17 million. We have been able to meet the target that's been given to us by your staff, largely by reducing the amount of restoration work that was proposed originally to be done in 2015. Your staff have all of the details of these programs, and we'll be doing more consultation, of course, as part of the budget development process. We are, of course, still looking at some future budget pressures. We had a great discussion at the advisory committee about the importance of the forest cover across the region, both urban and rural, and you're already asking for a follow-up report on that, and that could, of course, have some additional financial implications if we want to accelerate that work. I mentioned the work we're doing to identify potential solutions to flood risks in a number of communities, and none of the actual costs of those remedial works are included as yet in our forecasts. And then because we're getting these very frequent, very intense, high-flow events, we have to always be cognizant of the potential risks to existing infrastructure, and we're expecting that we'll be asking at some point in the future for additional support to allow us to do more stitch-in-time type projects where we have water mains or force mains or sanitary sewers or bridge abutments that need to be protected. We need to be able to fix these before they become major problems. I'll leave it at that, Mr. Chairman, and see if there are any questions.
Councillor Whitehead.
Thank you for your presentation. Excellent. One of the things that has concerned me for many years, and more so now, is that the province essentially is backed out of funding for conservation authorities. And I think that the presentation you made, certainly I can see that the support you get from the narrow base of property taxes allows you to do a lot of work with our support. My concern is these frequent storms and the damage. I mean, originally the conservation authorities were set up and funded by the province to deal with storm events and to deal with flood control and water monitoring and so on. Do you think that there is enough funding from the property tax base to continue to deal with this, or do we really need to start to press the province to go back to funding conservation authorities adequately, not to deal with the other issues you talked about, reforestation and Bolton Camp and so on, but the issue of flood control, both at the time of the flood and the infrastructure need to change and so on. All of these are massive projects. What's your views on the funding base to support what it is you're trying to do?